Bold and Blunt, and I'm your host, Cheryl Chumley, Christian conservative, look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. And today, foreign affairs even. We're going to look at what's going on in Israel with the Palestinians and talk to Dr. Hormoz Shariat, who is the author of Iran's Great Awakening and is going to help us understand how Iran, biblically speaking, figures into the tensions going on right now in the Middle East. Will be a fascinating discussion, I'm sure. Before we get into it, just a quick shout out to the Washington Times discount for Bold and Blunt listeners, 50% off a year's worth of access to the digital platform of the Washington Times. That's news, commentaries, and great podcasts like this one, like Bold and Blunt. Just go to Cheryl Chumley. No, I'm wrong. Go to WashingtonTimes.com/Cheryl and type in your info, and you will have a year's access to the digital edition of the Washington Times. That's funny. I forgot the address. I give it every week. Maybe I was thinking that you should go to the Washington Times and find my name, Cheryl Chumley, click on the hyperlink, and sign up for my 3 times a week newsletter that the Washington Times sends out Monday, Wednesday, Friday, right to your email box, before lunchtime, no less, so you have direct access to all my commentaries I write all week, as well as access to my twice-weekly Bold and Blunt podcast delivered right to your email box. No searching required. Of course, you should still check out the rest of the Washington Times website because we have the news that MSNBC and CBS and NBC and ABC and CNN, la-di-da, all the rest, don't want you to know about. So just for that very reason, be a rebel. Go to WashingtonTimes.com. Check out the news. Sign up for my newsletter, my podcast. And don't forget, stick around. We've got a great interview with Dr. Shariat coming up. First, let me play you something and see if you can guess what this is. Can you guess? Got a clue? Listen up. All right, enough of that. Let me just tell you what it is. It's the sound of a Joe Biden administration. Yes, that is what a weak, feckless Joe Biden administration sounds like. Of course, the sound that I was playing you wasn't Joe Biden speaking. It was the sound of Hamas, of Palestinian terrorists launching airstrikes into Israel. Yep, that's what it was. The first cut was a evening launch. The second was later at night, but both the sounds the same. The sound of a Joe Biden administration, because that's what you get. That's what you get in a world with a weak America. That's what you get with a weak president in the White House. You get hostilities in the Middle East. You get the world going nuts. You get radical Muslim terrorists who were kept at bay under a stronger administration, such as the President Donald Trump administration, who were kept quiet, kept sort of cowed, fearful of retaliation from a strong America. You get them becoming emboldened practically overnight. I mean, here we are, just barely in the beginning stages of the Joe Biden presidency. And what do we have? Utter turmoil kicking off in the Middle East. Hamas launching airstrikes like haven't been seen in years. Israel retaliating to levels of intensity that haven't been called for in years. Here we are back again. Once again, a weak White House. Can't wait for Joe Biden to make the statement that there's no such thing as radical Islamism. Stop calling it Islamic terrorism, that these are people who simply looking for jobs, just looking for better jobs and pay. Or how about this from John Kerry? It's all about the climate change. It's because they don't have adequate food, because they have droughts where they live. And so, of course, they're going to try and wipe Jews off the face of the earth. One naturally, logically follows another. This is what we get. Let me read from USA Today. Previous presidents, from Bill Clinton to Barack Obama, have appointed high-profile envoys to try to broker a peace deal between the Israelis and Palestinians. But those efforts have all failed, and some believe Biden did not want to devote precious foreign policy capital on a conflict that has frustrated even the most seasoned diplomats. Here's a quote from an editor of a left-leaning magazine called Jewish Currents, who wrote, what Biden wants to avoid above all is a fight with Israel that could prove politically costly at home, end quote. Well, the ship sailed on that one. I mean, Joe Biden can't please anybody right now. You've got the socialists, you've got the anti-Semites in Congress, the Ilhan Omar segment, hating Joe Biden right now because he won't come out and take a strong pro-Palestinian stance. He actually dares to suggest that Israel has a right to defend itself. And then you've got the Israel supporters. You've got those who actually want to support our main ally in the Middle East. Surprise, surprise, right? Or you've got those who are Christian, who look to the Bible and see that America must stand with Israel at all costs, right? Because God says he will bless those who bless Israel, and he will curse those who curse Israel. So for that reason, you have plenty of Christians who look to Israel as a gotta stand with at all costs. So you have that faction of America disappointed with Joe Biden right now because he wants to send out quasi-obvious statements saying, well, Israel has a right to defend itself, where the natural response is, no, duh, Joe. So what are you going to do about it, Joe, as the leader of the free world, Joe? Or are you just going to make that obvious statement and leave it at that? How about a little muscle behind those words? Well, of course, he did just approve a multi-million-dollar weapons sale to Israel. Okay. But at the same time, he also just in April approved $235 million in U.S. taxpayer-funded aid to the Palestinians. This from BBC. Who will receive the aid? Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the U.S. plans included $75 million in economic and developmental assistance in the West Bank and Gaza, $10 million for peace-building programs through the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, and $150 million, get this, in humanitarian assistance for the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian refugees, UNRWA. That's the agency that Donald Trump withdrew America from because the money was being used to help families of terrorists who killed or attempted to kill Israelis, our allies. Imagine that. So, Joe Biden, the feckless Joe Biden White House, is trying to walk both lines, trying to take a political path here, trying to appease both the socialists and the socialists who are anti-Semites and who would like to, as Hamas would like to, see Israel wiped off the map and all the Jews in the world strung up and killed. He's trying to appease that group. And at the same time, he's trying to appease the pro-Israel people. He's trying to appease Israel. You can't have it both ways. I mean, seriously, pick a side. It doesn't work. It does not work. And under President Donald Trump, let me say, there was no doubt about which side the Trump administration stood with. They stood with the side of our allies, Israel. They stood with the side of sanity. And they didn't just do it through the media, making public statements. They did it with action. Remember the capital of Israel, Jerusalem, moving, recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel? That was something that Congress had promised for years to do, but just kept booting the final action, the final act down the road for some other administration to deal with. Well, Donald Trump dealt with it. He declared it. He called it out. And he took a lot of heat from it from the terrorist sides of the world, right? He took a lot of heat from it, from the UN types, from the globalist types, from even Democrats in America. He took a lot of heat from it, but he did it anyhow. He took a stand. He took a side. Well, Joe Biden is trying to walk both sides. And this is what, I have to say, this is what terrorists wait for. They wait for weakness to emerge so they can capitalize on it, so they can exploit it. This is why we have this turmoil right now. This is why we have the heated turmoil. It's not as if it's always been peaceful. It's always peaceful under a Republican administration in the White House. It's always peaceful between Israel and the Palestinians. It's not. But the near overnight escalation of tensions, of rocket fire, that's due to Joe Biden. That's due to Joe Biden being in the White House. And you know, there's talk about where is this going to lead? First off, how is it going to end? I mean, Israel is not going to suddenly decide, you know what, let's stop defending ourselves. Hamas is not going to suddenly decide overnight, you know what, these Jewish people, they're not so bad after all. Let's let them live. Let's just live in peace. It's not going to happen. You know what else is not going to happen? Joe Biden and his administration is not going to take a strong stand with Israel that's backed in action, that's backed in unequivocal, certain, unceasing action. Not going to happen. So, where will this lead? That's the question, right? So, British Colonel Richard Kemp, he just said this to the National Desk, picked up and reported by ABC News. Here's his quote. Iran has done much more than advise Hamas. Iran has provided them with missiles. It's provided them with other munitions. It's provided them with the wherewithal to make their own rockets with money and with direction. Iran, said Colonel Kemp, wants chaos in Israel, of course. It wants the annihilation of Israel. But right now, what it's looking for also is leverage. So, something to keep in mind, that this may not just stay local, right? Because when you're talking tensions in the Middle East, you're talking about allies in other countries getting involved. So where's Iran? What's Iran going to do? Good questions, right? And my guest today, Hermoz Shariat. Like I said, author of Iran's Great Awakening. He is here today to talk about how the Iranian people feel about what's going on in the Middle East and how Iran is really no longer a Muslim nation. It's turning Christian. And even more interesting, how all this, the turmoil between Israel and the Palestinians, the Iran factor, the hotspot called the Middle East, how all this fits into biblical prophecy. It's going to be a fascinating discussion. And Dr. Shariat, thank you so much for being here on Bold and Blunt. I really appreciate your time.
Well, Thank you for inviting me, Cheryl. I appreciate that.
So let's start by looking at the modern news. What's taking place right now between the Israelites and the Palestinians? How do the Iranian people look at that?
Or talking about the Iran, you have to understand that the government approach to the problem is much, much different than what people think about the situation. So, what the government of Iran is doing is to support Palestinians. They are helping them financially, providing them with weapons. Many of those missiles are built by Iran or at least bought by Iran that are attacking Israel with. So, but the people of Iran, when they look at the situation, they are mad at their own government. They're saying, we are starving ourselves. We have financial problem. Why do you spend money to attack Israel and help the Palestinian people? You care more about them than us. So there is a disconnect between the government and people in everything, including the role of Israel and what we need to do with Israel.
Is it a disconnect that the people can rise up and overcome, or is it a disconnect that it is what it is and that's it?
Well, right now it is what it is, and the people of Iran are not ready to rise up and topple the government. They are just protesting on streets, and but they get killed. So they know they have to pay a high price if they want to change the government by force. So uh, I don't think that's coming. That there will be a bloody revolution in Iran. But the people of Iran are totally against their own government. Let me give you an example. The government of Iran says death to Israel, and we need to wipe Israel off the map.
Hmm.
But the people of Iran say, please tell us again, why should we hate Israel? What have they done to us? And some of them think if the government of Iran is saying death to Israel, they must be good people. you know, they don't trust their own government. And many of them are saying, actually, this is a slogan they say on the streets. There is a Farsi phrase that rhymes. It doesn't rhyme in English, but it rhymes in Farsi, saying, they are not our enemies, you are. What they mean is that Israel has not done anything to us. You are the ones who have ruined our lives. You are our enemies. And they're pointing their fingers at their own government and not Israel.
Could part of this growing tolerance for Israel and even embrace of Israel by the Iranian people be due, in part at least, to what you say is the country turning more Christian than Muslim?
Well, that's a factor, but the number of Christians are growing. But people of Iran have rejected Islam. I've been saying a sentence the last few years in my interviews and speaking at churches and conferences, and people were shocked until last few months. What I say is Iran is no longer an Islamic nation. And people used to tell me, oh, come on, you're exaggerating. Do you mean it's Christian? I said, no, I don't say it's a Christian nation. I say it's not an Islamic nation. Until a few months ago, last September, a very solid scientific survey came out. 50,000 Iranians responded to this question, what do you believe? And two university professors, non-Christians, did the survey. The result was this. Less than one-third of Iranians said we believe in Islam. One-third said we don't believe in God or God has nothing to do to our lives. And the third one-third were all over the place. They were looking at Eastern religion, Hinduism, everything except Islam. That's where people of Iran are. They are done with Islam and they're looking around, and Christianity is very attractive to them, by the way.
And why is that? What do you attribute this distaste for Islam?
Two things. One is that whatever Islam is not and they're mad at, Christianity is. For example, Christ is known in Iran as a Prince of Peace. They believe, if you ask a Muslim in Iran, a typical Muslim, even not yet a Christian, you ask them, what do you think about God? This is what you hear. Oh, no, I don't believe in this God that Islam tells me. I don't think that's a true God. And you ask them, so what do you think the true God looks like? And this is what they're going to say. I think the true God is a God of love, loves us and asks us to love one another. It's a God of forgiveness, forgives us and asks us to forgive one another. I mean, without even reading the Bible, they describe the God of Bible. And that's why when we at Iran Alive, we use satellite television, 24/7 broadcast. We go over the heads of the mullahs into people's homes, and the government cannot stop our signal. So when in the privacy of their living room, when we tell them about the love of God, it resonates with their heart. That's why Iran has the fastest growing evangelical population in the world. An independent survey has proven that.
And I just want to step back for a second and let listeners know that you are the founder of Iran Alive Ministries. So when you talk about piping that in, you're talking about your own ministry. And you're also a former Muslim who turned Christian. And maybe you can explain a little bit about how that journey took place.
Yes, when the Iranian Revolution happened, of course, I was born a Muslim, and I was serious in my early years, but then I focused on science and studies, and I came to United States right around the revolution to get my PhD in artificial intelligence. And I was doing my dissertation. The revolution happened, and I said, "Oh, maybe I should pay attention to Islam. Islam is taking over the world. Maybe I should study it. And if it's true, I'm going to dedicate my life to serving it. But I don't want to just blindly believe in it. Let me study it." So I studied Quran, and it didn't really satisfy my soul. I said, if God has written other books, and I'm a scientist, I'm a researcher, I'm going to read that. So I got a Bible, and I didn't think I would find anything new in the Bible because in Islam, they tell you Islam is the last and most complete religion. But I said that for my own scientific pride, let me just read it once. And as I read the book of Matthew, I realized, no, what is in the New Testament, especially, is totally different than what the Bible says about God, about salvation, about our future. Every basic thing there is such a difference. So I struggled for a few months of comparing the Bible and Quran, and at the end, I just realized the message is so simple that God loves you, and you cannot reach Him because He's holy and you're not. And because He loves you, He came after you through Jesus Christ. Such a simple message that a child can understand. I tried it. I prayed, okay, I want this. And my life was totally changed. And my marriage was healed. And I started sharing this good news with other Muslims.
So that was the genesis of your trying to reach out to other Muslims to convert them to Christianity, and now you're called the Billy Graham or Franklin Graham, I forget which, of Iran, right?
Well, it's the Joel Rosenberg by his grace. He calls me Billy Graham of Iran. Of course, I don't call myself
Yes.
that. And people of Iran are so open to other ideas except Islam. And one of them most attractive is Christianity because of its love, forgiveness, peace. And when Islam attacked Iran, Islam was not initiated in Iran. As you know, the
Hmm.
history, Iran was a Zoroastrian country for the most part when Islam attacked Iran. So the basic culture of Iran, when you look at the old poetry, old beliefs of Iranians, even today, the basic of the culture is not Islamic. It's more of a Christian value. They value love. You read Iranian poetry. They value love. They value forgiveness. They value kindness. So that's another reason Christian message is so received well among Iranians. So I came to Christ, and my life was changed. I said, this is selfish if I keep it to myself. And I started sharing the gospel with people in Southern California. Many came to Christ, planted churches. Eventually, I went from being a research scientist on AI, which I love that research. I started planting churches and reaching out to Iran through satellite television. And you know what? I believe Jeremiah 49:38. That's a prophecy about Elam, which is completely inside Iran. I believe that verse, and I believe it's happening. You know what it says? It says, God says in that verse, I will set my throne in Elam. So I believe the true God, the God that loves, the God that forgives and saves, He is going to be ruling Iran, maybe not too long in the future.
So you have a unique perspective because of your background and your emphasis on research that you bring to your ministry now. Talk a little bit about how what's going on between Israel and the Palestinian people, Hamas, uh, the United States and Iran in terms of biblical prophecy.
Well, there are two major prophecies, and on the surface, they kind of contradict each other, but as you look, both are happening at the same time. Ezekiel 38 talks about Iran, Persia, and Russia, Turkey, and other nations uniting and attacking Israel.
Mm-hmm.
That's an event in the future. And but at the same time, Jeremiah 49, verses 34 and on, talks about the future of Iran, talks about I will remove king and princes, I will scatter Iranians all over the world. It talks about the horrible war happening in Iran and many will be killed. But at the end, God says, but at the end, he says, I will set my throne there and I will restore the fortunes of Elam. I will bless them at the end. So these two prophecies, one attacking Israel and one God blessing Iran, looks like there are two different things. But when you look at what's happening in Iran, they're happening at the same time. The government of Iran is trying to fulfill Ezekiel 38, and the people of Iran are fulfilling Jeremiah 49, both at the same time.
So, when Americans look at the media, the national media, and they see death to America and death to Israel being chanted in the streets of Iran, how are we supposed to regard that?
Number one, even that has changed. Uh, those clips, if you see any clips, these are old clips. The last 2 years, the government of Iran has tried to put rallies by forcing its own employees and their families to come on the streets and shout death to America and death to Israel. I have several clips of those rallies set up by the government. And it's funny, Cheryl, this is what you see in those clips. The government official has all these crowds on the streets, and the government official in the loudspeakers says, death to America. And, people are supposed to repeat that, right? Death to America. And the people respond, death to Russia. And the speaker says, death to Israel. The people, this is their own people. Their own people respond, death to Russia. So they are not even saying death to Israel and death to U.S., especially United States. Many people don't know. Iranians love Americans. America is the ideal society for Iranians even today. If there is a change in Iran, if there was a referendum in Iran, people would vote for a democracy American style. Let me share another picture. Just a few months ago, the government of Iran put Israeli flag and U.S. flag on the sidewalks, so force people to dishonor it by walking over it. I have clips of it. People getting to those flags and they bypass it. They make an effort not to step on Israeli flag and U.S. flag. And these are crowds, not just one or two people. Crowds of people getting to that flag, not stepping, honoring it, and they sidestepping.
Let's just finish up with a quick conversation about the Joe Biden administration, and I guess I'll just leave it broad. What's your opinion of the Joe Biden administration, especially in comparison of the Donald Trump administration, in terms of overseas foreign affairs?
Well, it depends on who you ask. If you ask the government of Iran, they would say Joe Biden is great. Maybe we can have a deal with him. They couldn't deal with Trump. Trump was tough on them, and the sanctions were destroying the Iranian government. It was going down, and it has many, many problems because of the sanctions. So if you ask the Iranian government, they would say, oh, great, Biden, yes, maybe we can do something with him. Maybe we will get a deal similar to Obama's, which was very good for Iranian government. But you ask Iranian people, they're different. They say, what Trump was doing, even though it really put pressure on us, maybe it would have worked if it was continued. Maybe Obama, if he was selected as in a second term, maybe he would destroy this government and topple this government. So Iranians are of course, they're not in American politics. They're thinking of their own interest. But thinking about their own interest, they're thinking maybe Trump's policy would have done better for Iranian people than Biden. Of course, Biden is still working on the deal. We don't know exactly what will come out of it, but the Iranian government is hopeful to get a good deal out of Biden administration.
And just last question, what do you foresee if Biden loosens sanctions, re-enters a nuclear deal, that sort of thing with Iran?
It will prolong the life of the Iranian government. The Iranian government has lost its power on people, and it's keeping power by force and fear. And it was going down anyway because of the economy. Only thing that was bringing him down was the sanctions. Now, if Obama lifts the sanctions and somehow helps the Iranian government, it will help them to live longer. Eventually, Iranian government will come down because no government can live long without the total support of the people, or total rejection of the people. But the speed of going down will slow down with Biden.
Well, Dr. Shariat, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom, experience with Bold and Blunt listeners. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. May I share? I've written a book on this, and I would encourage your listeners to take it if you want to know more. It's called Iran's Great Awakening. Iran's Great Awakening. It's available everywhere. Talk about the prophecies in the Bible and what I see the future of Iran will be. Or you can just text a word like the word Iran, IRAN, to a number, 50700, 50700, the word Iran. And you will get some links, and you can go from there to know more about us or order the book.
Well, that makes it easy. Thank you for that. And it's an important book. So I appreciate your time once again.
Oh, thank you so much, Cheryl. God bless you. You're doing a great work.
Oh, God bless. Iran's Great Awakening. Here is what one promo says about the book. Join Dr. Shariat on a journey out of bondage of Islam to freedom in Christ. Learn what the Bible says about Iran and why Iran is just the beginning of something big, eternal, and of historical proportion that is already happening. I don't know about you, but that sounds fascinating. Sounds like a terrific read for these turmoil, tense times taking place right now in the Middle East, courtesy in large part